Good morning, boys and girls. Welcome back. We're so glad you're here as we're studying the story of Esther. And we left it off last time with the fact that the Israelites had just gotten some really bad news. The idea that they were going to be killed. That's right. They're going to, not fun. Haman was so angry with Mordecai that he had come up with the plan that all of the Israelites should be killed on a certain day. Well, we're starting off then in chapter 4, verse 1. It says, when Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes and went out in the midst of the city and cried with a loud voice and a bitter cry, and came even unto the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. So he is so upset by this. He's visibly showing that he's mourning, and he even came to the king's gate like that, which no one did that. No one came near the king showing they were sad. But Mordecai was so upset by what happened, he was even willing to go to the king's gate in that condition. Well, in every province, they heard what was commanded. There was a whole lot of mourning and weeping and just, what can we do? How can we defend ourselves? Why are they doing this? And just a lot of distraught people. Verse number 4, so Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told it her. Then was the queen exceedingly grieved, and she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai and to take away his sackcloth from him. But he received it not. So Esther, she finds out these people come and tell her, they're like, Mordecai, he's out there and he's mourning in the king's gate. And she's like, oh, take him these clothes, help him. And he won't receive it. He won't take the clothes. And this is kind of, we're going to have an interaction. It's going to go back and forth, but Esther's not going to directly talk to him. There's going to be a lot of messages sent back and forth. Verse number 5, then called Esther for Hatach, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to attend upon her, and gave him a commandment to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. She's like, hey, you, Hatach, come here. I need you to go to Mordecai. I need you to find out what's wrong. Well, Hatach goes out. He talks to Mordecai on behalf of Esther. He goes out. They're going back and forth. And Hatach finds out from Mordecai what Haman had done, what that commandment was. Verse 7, and Mordecai told him of all that had happened upon him and of the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. So Mordecai gives this message to Hatach, who takes it back to Esther and tells Esther, and wow, does this trouble Esther. Boys and girls, before we get too much ahead, does anyone in the palace know that Esther is a Jew? They don't. They have no idea. And Esther is just hearing about this decree. And can you imagine what's going through her head? All of her people are going to be killed, and maybe even her, but nobody knows she's a Jew. Maybe it won't happen to her. Maybe she can hide Mordecai. I'm assuming some of these thoughts, I don't know exactly what her thoughts were, but are kind of running through her head. What can we do? How can I escape? Those sorts of things. And boys and girls, who put Esther in that position? Who worked that out? God did. That's right, Peter. This is all part of God's plan. Esther is in this place at a specific time, and now I'm going to jump ahead myself here because that comes up in the verses in a little bit. Mordecai is going to kind of say that, like, God put you there. But God has a plan, and God has a way of working it out. So Hatach again is going kind of back and forth between the two of them. In verse 8, it says, also he gave him, so Mordecai gives Hatach, the copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it unto Esther and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go in unto the king to make supplication upon him and to make request before him for her people. It says, Hatach, tell her she has got to go before the king. She has got to go in and make supplication. She's got to make a request. She's got to plead with the king. Well, boys and girls, Esther, even though she's married to the king, she's the queen, she cannot just go into the king anytime she wants. She can't just go in and talk to him. If you went before the king without being asked, it was at the cost of your life. That's right, Peter. But they had a way, a code, basically, of the king saying, this is okay. So if somebody went in to see the king who wasn't requested by the king could put out his golden scepter here, and that would mean it's okay. This person came, I didn't ask for them, but I'm okay that they're here, and I will accept them. So that was kind of just the way it worked in the royal court, was if the king put out the scepter, that meant the person who had come to see him. But Esther's pretty nervous about this. Like, would the king put out the scepter to see her? Does he really want to see her? What if he doesn't and he cuts her head off? What's the difference? She's going to die anyways. So all of this is kind of going through her head, but Mordecai has asked her to do this. Now, boys and girls, throughout the story, even in the early chapters of Esther, we saw that Esther obeyed what Mordecai asked. So we're going to read on and find out, is she willing to do what Mordecai asks at the cost of risking her life? Peter thinks she is. No, Peter doesn't think she, Peter doesn't know. Peter wants us to read the story and find out. So as I speak for Peter as always. So Hathach again is going back and forth. Verse number 9 just tells us that he reports back to Esther. So let's jump back in at verse 10 with Esther's message back to Mordecai. Again, Esther spake unto Hathach and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter that he may live. But I have not been called to come in unto the king these 30 days. She's like, let me read one more verse. And they told to Mordecai Esther's words. So Esther's like, I haven't been called in for 30 days. It's been a month, basically, since I've seen the king. I don't think he really wants to see me. Now, it doesn't say that, but again, Esther has to have a lot of thoughts going through her head, boys and girls. This is at the cost of her death. So she's like, he hasn't asked to see me. He's probably not gonna ask to see me. And you do understand if I go. So again, they give the message to Mordecai. And so Mordecai hears the message. So verse 13 is his command back. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. So his first answer or first response back to her, boys and girls, is don't think you're going to escape. Don't think just because you're in the king's palace, you won't be killed. So let's put that argument to rest. You are not going to be the exception to the rule. And boys and girls, we don't know that Esther thought she was or not, but that is what Mordecai starts with. But it did make me think, how often do we think we're the exception to the rule? Well, the teacher said that, but it's okay if I do it. Or the teacher said, don't do this, but it's okay if I do this. But we fully know what the teacher meant, but the teacher didn't exactly say, don't do that. How often do we think we're an exception to the rules, boys and girls? And honestly, as adults, we often think we are as well. But that's Mordecai's first response, is don't think you're going to be safe just because you're in the palace. Verse number 14, for if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, in other words, if you don't go talk to the king, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. So Mordecai has full faith that God is going to rescue his people. If it's not by Esther, he'll do it some other way. But, is the next word, thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? That verse, boys and girls, often gets quoted, or that phrase gets quoted, for such a time as this. Boys and girls, God has uniquely gifted each one of us. You meet different people throughout your day that I don't meet. I meet people that you don't meet. And God has you in a specific place to do a specific plan. He has a purpose for you. He wants you to give the gospel to the people that you meet. God has you where you are for such a time as this. Now, we're not in the kingdom, boys and girls, and most of our decisions are not having as big of an impact as Esther's. But God still has a plan for each one of us where we are. So the question is, what is Esther going to do with this? When this response is brought back to her, what is her response going to be? So this is Esther's answer back. Verse 16, go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I had to be pretty hungry too, Peter. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. So Esther's like, all right, let's take 3 days. Let's fast. Let's show God we're serious about this. Let's pray about this. And then in 3 days, I'll go before the king. And he might put out his golden scepter. He might not. But she was willing to obey, boys and girls, even at the cost of her life. We will look forward to seeing you next week, boys and girls. But as you go about this week, remember, you're not the exception to the rule. And God has a special plan.